Hey guys, Robbie here from CrossFit South Bend. Today we're going to talk about a question that I get all the time from people asking me, what is the paleo diet? And even more importantly, should I try it? Is it something that's worth trying? Is it something that's going to benefit my life? Is it something that's going to harm me? What's it going to do for me? And what sort of things should I be eating? What sorts of things should I be avoiding? So we're going to try to answer those questions today. So I'm just going to lay my cards out on the table right now. The type of eating we basically advocate here at CrossFit South Bend is basically a version of the paleo diet. When you've seen me do videos in the past about what should I eat, and we say quality protein, vegetables, healthy fats, fruits, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, that's basically a paleo diet. Now it's also, in general, a real whole food diet, which is kind of the even more important umbrella term to be aware of. But in general, we are big fans here of the paleo diet. We think the things that it encourages you to eat are things that are incredibly healthy for you and has a lot of benefits for you that we'll go over. And we think that the things it tells you to avoid, which in general are usually recommended as things that you should eat, things like grains, dairy, vegetable oil, so on and so forth, actually are not quite as healthy for you as you might think. So just to lay the cards out there, we in general think a paleo diet is one of the better ways to eat. That being said, it's always important to remember that in general what we believe here also is just real whole food. Even if the real whole food that you're eating isn't the paleo diet, as long as you're cooking meals at home and eating real whole food, even if it includes some grains and dairy, in general that's a much better track to be on than the standard American diet. So even though we think a paleo template or a paleo diet tends to have far more benefits and far fewer drawbacks than most other nutritional protocols, in general, we are big fans of any nutritional protocol that says eat real whole food and avoid processed foods and sugar and soda, alcohol, and all the rest of it, okay? All right, guys, so with that being said, let's talk very briefly here about what you would eat on a paleo diet. So like I was just saying, the typical things that we recommend eating and the things that we think are going to make you the healthiest are, number one, quality protein. This is going to be things like meat, fish, seafood, poultry, chicken, duck, turkey, so on and so forth. Ideally here, kind of the paleo diet tends to recommend, grass-fed beef, wild-caught fish, pasture-raised pork, and chicken. As I've said before, and I'll say again, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. What that means is if you can't afford those things, just eat the stuff that you can afford for now and then work your way up to buying these higher quality versions of, grass-fed beef or wild-caught fish. Those ultimately are going to be better for the environment. They're going to have more nutrients for you, but don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Don't, say to yourself, well, I can't afford grass-fed beef, so I'm just going to go out and buy a bagel or something like that. No, try to eat what you can and what fits into your budget. You want to have vegetables, both starchy and non-starchy. These are going to be things, as most of you are aware, like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, spinach, so on and so forth. Those are the non-starchy vegetables. And then starchy vegetables as well. And this is a very important point to make, especially with regard to the paleo diet. People just say, oh, isn't it just the Atkins diet? Isn't it just super low carb? It is lower carb relative to the insane quantities of carbohydrates that standard Americans eat today. Most Americans today eat somewhere around, 400 grams of carbohydrates a day. And that's usually from this not so good section of carbohydrates. It's not from the vegetables and fruit section. So it's lower carb relative to that. It's usually recommending something like 100 grams to 200 grams of carbs a day. But it's by no means something that says you should absolutely minimize carbs. Like the Atkins diet says. It says try to have carbs in kind of smaller quantities than you would otherwise have in, say, a standard American diet, like those 400 grams of carbohydrates I was talking about before from grains or something like that. But in general, there's nothing wrong with having 100 grams or 200 grams of carbs a day, especially if you're an athlete. If you're a hard-charging athlete who's at a healthy weight, there's no reason you couldn't go up to 400 grams of carbs from these healthy sources. So you want to have, good carbohydrates, but you also want to have it from healthy sources. So there's nothing intrinsic to paleo that says you have to go super low carb or something like that. It's only low carb relative to the insanity that is the standard American diet and the amount of carbs that the standard American consumes today. So that's a very important point to clear up that people get confused about a lot. Healthy fats, things like olives and olive oil, macadamia nuts, macadamia nut oil, avocados, avocado oil, coconut oil, ghee, which is clarified butter, certain types of animal fats from quality sources, things like beef tallow, duck fat, so on and so forth, fruits, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. Now, as I've said before, these three up here, you need all three of these for health. If you're missing any one of these, you're missing a big part of health. So, people sometimes joke and say, oh, I'm a meatitarian or something like that, where they only eat meat and healthy fats. They're missing a huge part of their nutrition by not having vegetables and fruits. And again, we're just talking about this from a health perspective. There are lots of other considerations that one might take into account when deciding what to eat: ethical considerations, cultural considerations, sociological, religious, so on and so forth. Right now, we're just talking about health. And from a health perspective, these are the things that are going to make you the healthiest, and these are the things that are going to start to inhibit your health in one way or another. So those are the things that you want to eat on a paleo diet. Again, these three are the main ones that you would want to construct your meals around. These three are kind of additions. What do you want to minimize / avoid? First three, everyone understands, everyone's on the same page. Even if they eat this way, everyone knows processed foods, sugar, and liquid calories in the form of soda and alcohol aren't healthy for them. Everyone agrees to that. It really doesn't matter what nutritional philosophy you go with, everyone's basically going to agree with that. Why? Because these things don't have many nutrients, because they spike your blood sugar, they're psychologically addictive, they promote an unhealthy digestive system, and they're pro-inflammatory. So those are the reasons why, just in case you were curious. Now, the last three, of course, are where people sometimes get a little bit tripped up, because over the past 30 to 40 years, they've been told repeatedly, oh, these are the things that you should eat to make you healthy. In fact, the food pyramid said that somewhere between 45 to 65% of your daily calories should come from carbohydrates, in particular grains, which is just pure and utter insanity. And it's part of the reason why we've seen our health deteriorate over the past 30 to 40 years, even though our grain consumption and vegetable oil consumption has gone up, and our consumption of things like lard and butter and ribeyes and egg yolks has gone down pretty dramatically. So these last three are kind of unique to the paleo diet, and I've already talked about dairy in a previous video, and I will talk in particular about grains in a future video. But the reason why you want to keep these things out of your diet is because, let's take wheat as an example. So let's go through the good food standards that I've mentioned before. Wheat does not have much in the way of nutrition. You can look it up online, you can make it as objective as you like. If you compare wheat to any of the foods up here, the vast majority of the time, wheat is going to lose out in terms of nutrient density, in terms of vitamins A, C, E, D, K, minerals like magnesium and zinc. And in addition to that, in addition to the fact that it doesn't have that much in the way of nutrients, even hard, healthy whole grains, things like whole wheat, it actually has substances in it like phytates and phytic acid that actually block your ability to absorb certain nutrients like calcium, magnesium, iron, zinc, and vitamin D. So wheat is not particularly nutritious, particularly when compared to that, and it can rob you of certain nutrients. In terms of blood sugar spikes, wheat is not your friend. Wheat tends to spike blood sugar pretty dramatically. It's psychologically addictive. This isn't the same for everyone, but I know for me, and I know for lots of others, bread is something that once someone has a bite of, it's something that they can't quite put down. It's much more psychologically addictive than, let's say, a steak or some broccoli or some white potatoes or something like that. People feel drawn to it. It is not healthy on the digestive system. It is pro-inflammatory, and there is clinical peer-reviewed evidence that you can look up on PubMed if you'd like, again, to make it as objective as possible, that implicates gluten and other grain-based proteins in the genesis and exacerbation of autoimmune diseases. So grains, especially wheat, which is kind of the number one offender, are not healthy for you. Dairy, as I've talked about before, is kind of a gray area. Dairy is healthy to the extent that it's grass-fed, full-fat, non-homogenized, and comes from a local family farm. To the extent that it doesn't meet those criteria, like most dairy that you see in most grocery stores, it is less healthy. And then vegetable oils. over the past 30 to 40 years, we've been told that if we replace, lard and tallow and all these other types, and butter and all these other types of fats that our grandparents and great-grandparents used to use to cook with, and we replace them with, canola oil and cottonseed oil and margarine, we will be much healthier. The exact opposite is true. Vegetable oils are extremely high in omega-6 fats, which are incredibly inflammatory, especially when they come from a man-made source. They are very prone to oxidation, which basically means that they break down and form toxic compounds when exposed to light, heat, and air, the main conditions under which we cook. So they are very, very, very unhealthy for us. They're very high in omega-6s, very low in omega-3s, and this contributes to an imbalance that we have today between omega-6 fats and omega-3s. We don't eat enough fish, and we consume way, 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 way too much omega-6 fats in the form of vegetable oils and things like wheat, corn, and soy, which tend to be very, very high in omega-6 fatty acids. So in general, you want to try to eat these things, and you want to try to avoid these things. Now, one thing I should say, before we go on, is that this is not a religion, okay? People tend to get all caught up in this, and they think this is like, if you say you follow the paleo diet, that's like saying you're a vegan, and it means you can never have, if you were a vegan, that would be saying something like, I'm never going to have meat again. Paleo diet isn't quite like that. It's a template. It's a means to an end. It's a way to get you healthy. It's perfectly consistent to be someone who follows a paleo diet the vast majority of the time, and then when they have a birthday or a wedding or an anniversary, they have some, wedding cake, or they have some wine or something like that. There's nothing inconsistent about this, and there's no dogmatism about it. There's no religion about it. It's not like we can say definitively, oh, this one thing is paleo and this other thing is not. Paleo is a template. It's a way of thinking about food and what makes us healthy that should be used to think about whether you're making quality food choices or not. When you slip into this idea that, those cookies made over there with maple syrup and almond flour, those are paleo, but some white bread or something like that isn't paleo. We have to always think about what's healthy and what's not healthy. It shouldn't be any form of dogmatism or this is kosher, this is not kosher. So it's perfectly consistent to be someone who follows the paleo diet the vast majority of the time to be healthy, but occasionally decides to indulge for some special occasion. In fact, on the paleo diet, it's actively encouraged because there are more aspects to health than just what you eat. So that's a really important point to keep in mind. Now, what are the benefits of a paleo diet? What makes the paleo diet something that tends to be more effective than, say, other diets? So paleo diet is incredibly nutrient dense. In fact, if you had to single out one quality that a paleo diet tends to focus on more than almost any other quality, it's the nutrient density of food. It is the extent to which food contains not just adequate nutrition, but almost a superabundance of nutrition. We don't want to just have the minimum daily requirement of vitamin D. We want to have optimum requirements. We want to have things that make us healthy. So if you had to single out one thing to say that makes the paleo diet unique, it's going to be that nutrient density of food. Paleo focuses on food quality, again via nutrient density, but also via things not just nutrient density, but things like where does the meat come from? What's its impact on the environment? Things like that, and a health-first focus. In the paleo diet, it doesn't focus as much on food quantity, although that's important. We're focusing not on weight loss, although that's important. We're focusing on getting you healthy first and eating the highest quality food. So it's a real whole food approach that focuses on food quality and nutrient density. Again, this idea of real whole food, even though Michael Pollan and Mark Bittman aren't followers of the paleo diet, what they share in common with the paleo diet and what we share in common with them is this emphasis on real whole food. If your great-grandparents didn't recognize it as food, it isn't food. If it didn't, come from the natural world, chances are it probably is not food. So that's a really, really important point. And again, we have to step back from dogmatism. We have to step back from saying, well, if it's not the paleo diet, it's not the right way to eat. No, there's lots of different paths to healthy eating, and this more important umbrella term to keep in mind, of which paleo is a part, is the idea of real whole food. Another benefit of the paleo diet, there's no calorie counting, carb counting, or point counting. Do calories matter at a certain point? Sure. Do carbs matter at a certain point? Sure. You can't have 600 grams of carbs if you have bananas and sweet potatoes a day and say, oh, well, it's paleo, I'm good to go. Of course, that stuff matters at a certain point. But in general, what matters more than food quantity is food quality. So that's definitely a benefit compared to other forms of eating. It's low glycemic, meaning it doesn't send your blood sugar on a roller coaster throughout the day, which unfortunately the standard American diet does. It's not psychologically addictive. If you focus on any one of the foods here, you're going to be hard-pressed to find any that are psychologically addictive compared to any of the foods down here, which are primarily psychologically addictive. The foods that call out to you from, the grocery store aisle, from the freezer at night. These foods support digestive health. These foods do not. These foods up here are non-inflammatory / anti-inflammatory. These foods are pro-inflammatory. They make your inflammatory status worse. And these foods tend to promote health when it comes to things like autoimmunity. These foods tend to promote disease when it comes to autoimmunity. And there's peer-reviewed, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies out there, particularly with regard to things like multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, to show that these foods tend to minimize / help heal autoimmunity, and these foods tend to exacerbate autoimmunity. Okay? So those are some of the benefits of the paleo diet. What are some common objections? So, if you ever make the mistake of telling anyone that you follow the paleo diet, which by the way, I recommend against, don't tell anyone, just, follow it by yourself, and don't get into a food war with anyone else. People tend to get very sort of religion and politics about these things. But if you ever do get into one of these debates, you'll see that people will ask these kind of really silly objections. There are legitimate objections to the paleo diet. Unfortunately, most of them tend to be kind of silly. Didn't cavemen die at age 30 roughly? First of all, misconception number one, paleo diet isn't based on what a caveman ate or did not eat. There are lots of things that cavemen did or did not do that we do today. Just because they did it back then doesn't mean we should do it. So that's misconception number one. Misconception number two is, yes, cavemen and women died in general at an earlier age for acute reasons, like getting attacked by a bear or a tiger or getting some sort of disease. And they didn't have access to medical treatment. But the way they were eating, the way they were getting sun exposure, the way they were sleeping, their stress levels, all those things contributed to health. And modern hunter-gatherer societies survived long into old age without any of the chronic health conditions that we currently experience. So once you have access for these types of hunter-gatherer societies where they don't die from acute causes, they actually live as long as we do and without any of the chronic health conditions that we have to deal with. Another misconception, isn't it just, Fred Flintstone, isn't it just people just, sitting around eating a big ribeye on a stick or something like that? No, in fact, one of the biggest misconceptions I'd say about paleo is that it's just meat and fat, when really the vast majority of your plate is actually going to be taken up by vegetables and starchy vegetables to get you some carbs. So paleo, believe it or not, is a plant-based diet in the sense that the vast majority of what you eat is going to be from plants. Now, is there some meat in there? Of course. Is there some fat in there? Yes. But it's actually a plant-based diet. The vast majority of what you eat is plant-based. Now, when I say plant-based, I don't mean exclusively plant-based. That's not the case at all, as many of you know. But the vast majority of what you would eat or put on your plate is going to be some form of plant, whether it's fruits, nuts and seeds, or spices, or vegetables. And some types of healthy fats are plant-based. What about healthy whole grains? Well, like I talked about before, and like I'll talk about in a future video, this is just a complete and utter misconception that grains are healthy for you. In particular, it's a misconception that wheat is healthy for you. Even more so within that frame, it's even more of a misconception to assume that Grains are heart healthy. Nothing could be further from the truth. They're actually pro-inflammatory, and they contribute to the oxidation of cholesterol particles and to the inflammatory process that makes heart disease what it is. So I'll talk about that later on in a future video. This last question isn't a particular question I get, but it's a version of a question I get all the time. Is maple syrup paleo? Are these brownies paleo if I make them with almond flour? Couple things to say here. One, we've got to remember this whole idea we don't want to make paleo into a dogma or a religion. This isn't like we say, oh, well, this is kosher and this is fine to eat and this is, not kosher, not fine to eat. Paleo is a framework. It's a template for thinking about, is your food nutrient dense? Is it contributing to your health or not? So is maple syrup contributing to your health? Probably not. Is it something that is a less unhealthy sweetener that's got maybe a few positives in it? Sure. But don't make any mistake about it. When you have things like, gluten-free cookies or gluten-free cake, that's not positively contributing to your health. Now, does that mean you can never have it? Of course not. In fact, we have a series with Wellness Wednesday now that we're doing called Amy's Treat Corner. And the reason we're doing it is because there's more to health than just nutrition. If you can't share something that you enjoy with your family friends every once in a while for a special occasion, something deeply important about health is being missed. So while I wouldn't ever think of, treats, whether they're cookies, pies, cakes, what have you, whether they're gluten-free or with maple syrup, I would never think of those things as positively contributing towards health in the sense of being nutrient dense. I do think occasionally those can be okay in the context of sharing a special occasion, whether it's religious, familial, with friends, what have you, as a way to, bind yourself further with social ties and have a good time with friends and family. So don't be dogmatic about it. Don't say, oh, maple syrup is paleo, but processed sugar isn't. At the end of the day, they're both sugar, right? So just recognize that we want to just think about these things more deeply rather than just to say, well, it's either kosher or it's not kosher, right? Okay, so we just talked about all this different stuff, and you're probably thinking to yourself, should I try it? Is this worth giving a try? Put simply, I'll just give you the flat-out answer. Yes, I do think this is something that you try now. The caveats that come with any one of these things come with this. Always consult your doctor. If you're pregnant or breastfeeding, make sure you consult with your doctor as well. But put simply, yes. At the end of the day, what the paleo diet is asking you to eat is real, whole food. That's it. There shouldn't be anything controversial about this, right? It's real, whole food. There are no boxes, there are no shakes, no bars. No one owns the trademark to the paleo diet. It's just real whole food, right? It's what people have been eating for generations and generations and generations. So there really shouldn't be much that's controversial about this. And there are a lot of benefits that come along with it. So at worst, you'll have to give up some food that you maybe like processed foods or sugar or liquid calories or grains for a period of time. But at the end of the day, any diet that's going to focus on health is going to ask you to give up these three things. And maybe some of these other things as well. But at best, you could see some dramatic improvement in your health. Not just weight loss, but dramatic improvement in your health that you might not have otherwise gotten from some other way of eating. So I would say, yes, give it a try. It's really something that's personally benefited me. It's benefited a lot of people here at our gym, and it's benefited a lot of people across the world. So at the end of the day, it's real whole food, and it's something worth giving a try to. All right, guys, hopefully by the end of this video, you've got a good sense of what the paleo diet is, whether it's worth trying. The answer is yes. And hopefully we've answered some questions that you might have about the paleo diet and, answered maybe some objections that might have come up when discussing it with some friends or family. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.